Pencil Kings, 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 Pencil Kings.
If you have that self-drive and you have a little bit of talent sprinkled on top, then you're going to do totally fine.
All right, it's Wednesday, and you know what that means. It's time for another inspiring interview from the Pencil Kings podcast. Today, we're talking with Ned Rogers, and we're going to talk about education, which is something that I'm very passionate about because there's like this blend of when you're a working professional and then you go to teach that, you're not necessarily like a professional teacher, but then you have professional teachers who are not necessarily professional artists. So how do we blend this and how do we get smart about it? So welcome to the call, Ned. How are you doing this morning?
Hey, man, I'm doing really well, yeah. Thanks for having me.
And you're in sunny Australia, which will be, it's your summertime. Jealous.
It's getting there, yeah. Yep.
So just to start off, could you give us a 1 to 2 minute overview of some of the projects you've worked on and what kind of art you do?
Sure. Well, I'm currently working as a freelance concept artist, and I kind of spread my work across video games, film and TV, animation, all that kind of stuff. I've been doing this for about 5 years all up now. Probably about half and half working in studio and the other half freelance. I started off working on the commercial side of things, mostly in TV ads and that kind of stuff. And then after doing that for a few years, I figured out that I wanted to shift into the more exciting side of the industry. No offense to anyone who works in the television side, but I wanted to shift into kind of video games and animation and that kind of thing. So I decided to just strike out on my own and go freelance. And ever since then, I've worked on kind of a lot of pitch work. I do a lot of pre-development or pre-development stuff, working often directly with directors and producers to take script treatments and develop, pitch visuals and that kind of stuff. So that they can get backing behind projects and get them made, which is, that's a really interesting side of things that I enjoy. And I've been a few projects I've worked on. There's a animated kids show called The Deep, which is kind of written and produced out of Australia here, which has just come out recently and is doing really well. And another one you may have heard of is The Adventures of Figaro Foe, which is a kind of a wacky, kind of fantastical animated series. And most recently, I've just been working on Lawbreakers, the video game, working with Boss Key in North Carolina to do concept work on that stuff. So
right off the bat, I've got to say that, and I'm curious about, you say you've been a freelance or a concept artist for 5 years. Was it 5 years ago that you started and you said, okay, I'm going to be a concept artist and I'm starting from zero? Or what's sort of the backstory of that 5 years?
I always forget my dates. I'm really bad with dates, but if we go with the 5 years, if we stick with that story, basically I went through 3 years of university before that, so 8 years ago, studying graphic design and illustration, but more of, classical editorial Time magazine cover illustration stuff. Not that I ever had any Time magazine covers. Yeah, so I did that for 3 years and then was lucky enough to get an internship at the company that I started working for initially, which is a company called Monkey Stack here in Adelaide. And so, it was basically, I went straight out of uni. Well, I think there was maybe about 6 or 7 months between university and actually starting that internship. But just straight into the internship. And then that was, I think, 3 months. And then after that, it was just, they hired me on and it was just straight into work. So I think I was relatively lucky in that sense because I didn't have to do too much searching around, which was nice.
And the reason why I wanted to ask is I just feel like your portfolio is so rich in the colors, and a big part of being a concept artist is selling an idea or telling a story of what's going to happen here. And I just felt like, wow, these images are beyond 5 years of experience. So I'm glad to hear that there was some backstory, that you just didn't pick it up one day, and now 5 years later, you're here rocking it like a boss. And give some of us hope.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. That's very kind of you to say. But yeah, no, there was 3 years of university in there. And I guess, there's the classic backstory of I was always drawing things as a kid and blah, blah, blah. But yeah, there was some extra education in there. It wasn't just a matter of deciding I wanted to do it. I'm not that kind of proactive artist in that sense.
All right. So the thing that I'm curious to talk to you about is the whole education process. And could you give us just a little bit of the backstory and how you got started? Because I know you're working as a studio artist, and now you started to do some education. Is it at a local college, or is it a private? Private institution?
Sorry, I didn't mention that. I should have. Basically, it's a place called CDW, which stands for Concept Design Workshops, which runs out of Adelaide, and it's part of Flinders University, which is one of the universities here. And we run a 3-year bachelor course and a master's course as well, which I can get into a bit later, which basically is about taking people from any age level, really, but essentially people who want to go to university to study something like concept design, and instead of having to just study fine arts or an arts degree or something like that, we're offering up kind of a course that allows people to directly study concept design and animation and 3D design and that kind of stuff, so that we hopefully have a little bit of a pathway directly into the industry that way. And yeah, we started as a private college, but yeah, we've now been picked up with Flinders University, which is really good.
So the big question that I want to ask about this is that from interviewing past people on the podcast, I know the ones that make it and get hired right out of college and kind of hit the ground running are the people who spend essentially every waking moment drawing, working on their art, learning as much as they can, connecting with experts who can maybe open doors for them. And that's really tough. That's not your usual college experience as far as I'm concerned, or your university experience.
Yeah.
There's really not a whole lot of time to do anything else. And so what I'm curious about, and we're talking about entertainment design here, if you want to make patterns for quilts, it could be completely different. If you want to do fine art, it could be completely different. But we're talking about entertainment design here, so games, film, toys, things like that. How do you... The thing I want to ask is, like, how do you motivate these people, or how do you set the expectations so that by the time they're done, they've kind of ramped up their expectations on what it really takes? Because I feel like it's really hard to get that momentum, but once you're there and once you're used to putting in that amount of time, or you've honed your skills enough that you're not making these same beginner mistakes, it's not so hectic. But to get to that point is crazy.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That is the real tough bit about it, I think. And I think we try and get around that in a few ways. One of which is the course itself that we run does have a portfolio entry requirement. So you do have to show some sort of, motivation and self-drive to get there in the first place. And that kind of, I guess, that sets a bar at a certain point and lets people know, okay, if you're serious about this, this is where you have to get. And, not to discount also the fact that you have to front up the money for a 3-year bachelor course as well, which is not insignificant. But I think, and then the way we run the course, basically we try and keep it as close as possible to not a studio environment, because it's not a studio, but we run it in terms of deadlines and workload. We keep that as close to kind of a professional level as is realistic and is possible. So, I mean, I often look at the course load that a lot of my students have, and honestly, if you can stay on top of it, we kind of look at it and we go, okay, if you're doing all of this work, you're probably actually doing more work than a large percentage of professional artists out there, because we really kind of just pile it on. And then the expectation is, look, we're going to give you all of this work, do as much as you can. And if you can do all of it, then you're going to be well ahead of the curve. And so I think there's certainly a lot of pressure. And like you said, it's not necessarily what people might think of as a college lifestyle or a university lifestyle, because we don't shy away from the fact that if you want to do this professionally, you kind of have to work your ass off. But at the same time, we kind of temper that with the expectation that, okay, look, these are not professional artists. These are students and they're learning, and we kind of tailor it as much as possible to the individual as you can, which I think is really important, because otherwise you kind of risk people kind of getting tossed under the bus and just getting kind of caught up in it all, and then getting spat at the other end with no discernible result, which is not really helpful for anyone, really. So it's something we try and avoid, I think.
Can you talk a little bit about that? What you mean by tailoring it to the individual?
Well, I mean, obviously, when you have students coming in, even though everyone is kind of just starting, the tertiary education journey, if you will, everyone's at a slightly different level, and everyone has slightly different interests. And, some people are really into the fantasy stuff. Some people are into sci-fi. Some people haven't figured out what they're into at all yet. And then on top of that, you'll have different levels of skill and, talent and that kind of stuff. And so basically what we'll do is whenever we set the course outline, we start fairly vague in terms of directions, art directions and briefs and kind of variety of different outcomes. And then you have to kind of look around and make a judgment call often on kind of where people are at in their own skill level and, level of taste and level of design, and then try and work with each student and figure out, okay, how are we going to go about solving these problems that you have and these things you need to learn and these interests you have, as much as we can. We have relatively small class sizes for the most part, which allows us to do a little bit more kind of hands-on one-on-one feedback and kind of development with each of the students, which I think is really important, because otherwise you just end up running a sweatshop, which is not really useful, I don't think, for anyone.
Yeah, and going back to that sweatshop comment, I've heard from other people, or some people that I've talked with, that there are art schools, and I think there's actually a large amount of these art schools that will take literally anyone, as long as you can pay the tuition. But you're talking about that you have portfolio requirements, and even though a lot of schools have portfolio requirements, they're still taking anyone that can take the money. So let's say they had 100 slots and 100 people applied. All of those people would get in. Let's take that same school with 100 slots, and let's say 120 people applied. They will take 100, and it'll be the 20 that were the worst wouldn't get in. So how do you guys? I'm curious about the level of portfolio or how you look at it, because let's be honest, my high school portfolio was atrocious. I had no idea what I was doing. I knew I wanted to make video games, but give us a sense of kind of like what level of portfolio, because I think that there's a lot of high school students or people who are looking to change careers, and they're not really sure what their portfolio should include, or like, do you have strict guidelines that people have to follow?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't actually personally do the portfolio stuff myself. There's other instructors at the school that do that stuff. And then also there are some coordinators at the university who are in charge of that as well. But they're all people who have had a long-running career in either art education or being art professionals. In terms of the level and stuff, it's not, I guess you could say, we're not expecting people to come in at even a close to professional level. So if you go onto somewhere like ArtStation and have a look at the, top row there, it's not like we're expecting, 18-year-olds to come out of high school and be like, okay, I can do this. Here we go. Because if you can do that, you're going to get a job anyway. It's mostly, I guess, about setting an expectation of self-motivation and self-drive, because I think there's probably the hardest thing you have to do as an art student, especially going into a really kind of fast-paced industry like entertainment design, is get yourself up to, I guess you could put it in a sense, there are two thresholds you have to meet. The second threshold, which I'll kind of explain first, is the one that gets you into the industry. Because I think there's kind of a level of work you have to be able to attain consistently, and then you become like a good employment option. And then the first one you have to get is the threshold to almost like, I guess, prepare yourself to be taught at an industry level. And that's a threshold, that first one, that you can only reach. You have to reach that yourself, because if you can't get to that threshold yourself, it's going to be really hard for an instructor or any sort of mentor to then like kind of lift you up to the second threshold. So I guess the
the going back to the portfolio requirements we have, it's a matter of having the people who want to get into the course show us that they can sit down and produce work at any sort of consistent level, even if that level is relatively low. If you can produce 10 pieces that are all up to that level, we can then look at that and go, okay, you can sit down and do the work. You get this. You understand that you have to produce something. You have to have a final product. No matter how low the level is, you can just sit down and do it. And then that kind of lets us know that you're kind of ready to be sat in a classroom, sitting there 5 days a week, pretty much 8 hours a day expected kind of work and do what we kind of ask of you. And I think that's really important to be able to get yourself up to that level of self-motivation, because without that, it's really going to be hard, I think.
Oh, I love that answer, because it doesn't exclude anybody. You don't have to be at the ArtStation level. And I know that when I go on ArtStation or when I browse the net, it can be really punishing. And that was my next question. So I'm on ArtStation right now. I'm looking at your portfolio, and I already said how I admire how you can transcend different styles, and I love like the bright colors. And I feel like you're really you're doing a great job of selling the environments and the situations that these characters are in. But when you're tailoring things to individuals and just knowing where, like having been in production environment, I see how there's ArtStation and there's all these amazing artists that people look up to on YouTube or whatever, and they think, dang, I'd really like to work in games, but I can't do it as good as Ned or whoever their favorite artist is. I just think it's not for me. But then having been on the inside, I know that there's a lot of other creative jobs that people can do. I mean, if you take the most realistic video game and then you take something like Farmville or some other popular casual game, like there's this huge difference in style, and there's a lot of work for people. So how do you work with somebody to say like, okay, you might not ever be successful at doing hyper-realism, but that's okay. That's not where you're successful at. There's this whole other realm of a type of work or style of work that you can be successful. Let's hone your skills in that direction.
Yeah, totally. That's a really good point, because like you said, there's only going to be so many jobs on any given project, and there are so many different projects. There's such a wide range of kind of visual styles out there at the moment. That we don't limit people to doing like the next, so let's say Call of Duty or something like that. And I guess in one sense, it's kind of lucky in a way that a lot of the instructors that we have at CDW are not people that have a artistic style that would be straight down the line towards the next Call of Duty or the next Battlefield or the next Gears of War. We've got a really wide range of instructors that have a really wide range of artistic styles. And in terms of kind of the educational side of it, what we're really focusing on teaching rather than aesthetics is the ability to design well, which I think transcends the visual style, and the kind of the knowledge we can pass on about the realities of the industry and how you have to work. Because I think there's a lot, if you get down to the base level stuff, there's a lot of things that are going to be similar across every project, whether or not we're talking Farmville or if we're talking, Clash of Clans, or we're talking Call of Duty or Battlefield. If we can teach you the fundamental design skills and the fundamental studio working skills, and kind of the fundamental creative stuff, no matter what aesthetic you go for in the end, I think it's going to serve you well. And so that's the stuff we really try and nail down early, is just, look, can you, if someone tells you to draw something, we're going to teach you someone tells you to design something, or someone gives you a function or a script that you have to work off of, we're going to give you the skills that allow you to just visualize the idea, no matter what the aesthetic is. Because I think that's the really important stuff. And it's less about kind of the flashy imagery as it is about the really useful, functional design visualization you can do.
I'm glad that you brought that up. Because again, I want to go back to this, like, I love dispelling or trying to get to what things are really like, because when you're looking from the outside in, it's almost like you're watching a magic show. You just see this artist and they create this amazing work and you're like, wow, the magician just pulled the rabbit out of the hat or whatever they did. Your mind is blown. But you're talking about fundamental design skills and how that's more important. It's not the flashy image at the end that people think that they're aspiring to. It's more about the good fundamental design. And can you sort of just talk through what that actually means? Because I see so many people just trying to be, just quote unquote, be awesome. If I was just awesome, then everything would be great.
Yeah.
But what I feel like, and what I see, is that you don't have to be at such a high level. Like, awesome is something that you can aspire to, and that's sort of like your career path, something that never ends. You're always aspiring to be better. But good design is important, and there's so much work for good design, but people just give up and say, like, well, I'm not awesome like Ned, Feng Zhu, Bobby Chu, whoever you want to talk, whatever name drop you want to do. But it's really about the design. So can you explain what that means to you? Because I feel like there's not a good understanding, because people are just looking at awesome.
Sure. Yeah. I think, and I mean, look, I'm not going to put myself out here as some sort of authority on this stuff, but it's, to me, and the stuff that I drill into my students all the time, is the most important thing is, let's say we're designing a thing, right? You have a prop or a character or, a certain piece of architecture or something like that. The important thing is, when you're working on a project in production or even in pre-production, it's a matter of, one, can you visualize the design? Can someone look at this and go, I see, I know what that is. That's a car, that's a rubbish bin, that's a crate, it's a tree, it's whatever. Does it look like what it's meant to be doing? That's, I think, your number one priority as a designer in that sense, in terms of working in visuals, is you have to be able to visualize things, which is, shouldn't be a huge surprise, but I think a lot of people kind of miss that fact along the way. And then the second really important thing is, if you're working in production with other people, you have to understand that, obviously a game is not made by one person. Some of them are, some great games are, but, big budget productions are, hundreds of people. And as a designer, you're at the front of that wave. And if your work is not easily kind of interpreted by the next people down the pipeline, then it's really not useful design work, because no one else can action that and turn it into something cool. And I think one of the things that a lot of people who are just getting into their education don't often realize, I think they know it deep down, but they often forget it because they look at the flashy stuff and go, oh man, I want to do that. Is that 99% of the stuff that you do as a concept artist is not pretty. It's really ugly. And it's often just like little scratchy drawings here with arrows pointing and little notes written to the next guy down the line, who can just look at that and go, oh, okay, cool, that's a hinge, or oh, I see, that's a leaf, or that's some weird alien thing. And it's really a combination of getting, those good drawing skills up to a nice level so that you can quickly and easily visualize an object, and then knowing what the people down the line are going to be doing, what the animators are going to be doing, what the modelers are going to be doing, and what information they need to get their job done quicker. And then, after that, all the pretty imagery you see on the internet, a lot of the time, that's a result of not just a concept artist going crazy for a day and painting some amazing image. It's, 6 rounds of quick sketches that then went off to a 3D modeler who created, a quick block out model and then sent it back, and then you painted over that and scribbled some notes, and then you came to a bit where you went, oh, not really sure what to do there, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be easier for the 3D modeler to do that. So you send it back and they do that, and they send it back and you paint over it again, and then it ends up going all the way down the line, and then 3 months later you end up with a final thing. And that's kind of like the reality of it. But I think a lot of students just coming into it think that we just sit in front of a computer and paint this amazing final visualization of the entire game level or something like that, and then just send it off and it magically appears, like you said. But it's a really easy myth to dispel, but it's one that seems to like kind of permeate every single level of kind of education in concept art, is that people think that it's a matter of, like you said, just sitting down and painting flashy images, but it's not. It's much more I guess, mechanical and gritty, and kind of a matter of really just fixing problems as they arise, instead of just creating pretty pictures.
Okay, so when you're prepping your students to go through and get ready to start applying for jobs, what do you advise them? And I know it's tailored to the individual, but we're now talking about balancing. I'm sure they're going to have some hero shots, some of the pretty pictures that we just talked about, but they're also going to need to show a lot of the functional design work. Like, and when we're talking about design work, just so you, as a listener, you can visualize this. Let's say there's a car. As a 3D, you're going to take your car design that you designed, like it's this future car, and it's got all this detail on it. If you sent the pretty picture to a 3D modeler, they might be able to do it, but they're going to have to interpret a lot. So in order to get that car to the 3D modeler, you're going to have to do a side view. You're going to have to do a front view. You might have to do a top view. Depending on the game, you might have to do a bottom view, a 3/4 view, and you might even have to do like flyaway or cutout views or damaged views. Like, there's just so many different things, and these are not done in let's say fully rendered pretty style most of the time. But what do you prepare your students with at the end for their portfolio, that you feel like, okay, we've done our best, we've raised our child, and we're ready to set them off into the wilderness and just, let them carve their own path now? What do they come out of school with, where you feel like, okay, I feel good that we did our job, we prepared them, and this is a portfolio that is going to show well?
I guess the way, one of the ways we tackle that is the way that we structure the semester, in that we have 12-week semesters, and pretty much every week that we kind of expect students to have, they'll have a different brief of something that they need to produce. So if we're talking about, one of the classes I teach is environmental design. Every week it's going to be basically a different brief, and they're going through that and creating sketches and then final images. And then we kind of do that every week. And then the last month of the semester is what we call a major project, where they get a more detailed brief, and they're expected to basically rerun through the same processes they've learnt in the previous 8 weeks, and then present that at the end as a progression of work through from thumbnails all the way through to the pretty stuff. But in between, we expect them to produce work that would allow someone to interpret that design properly. So like you said, if it was a car, it would have all of those orthographics and all of those cutouts and callouts. And so by doing that over the course of their education, they're doing this every semester, doing multiple major projects from all the different subjects that they're studying. And at the end, that means that they basically have this portfolio of work which shows that progression, which shows that understanding of the design process, and shows the understanding of a design pipeline. And so from that, I guess they have a portfolio that isn't just pretty pictures, because most of the work that we expect them to do is the kind of the rougher stuff that I think is more useful in a pipeline kind of situation.
And just so we can further dispel some of these bad myths that hold people back, I never worked as a concept artist. But when you have been working as a concept artist, what do you think the ratio is between hero images, where you're fully painting something out so that you can really get a feeling for whatever the thing is that you're doing, versus the rough sketches? Is it the typical 80-20, or is it even skewed further than that?
Oh man, I get from my experience, I've probably maybe had a slightly different path towards it, because I've done a lot of the pitch work. And I think pitch work is slightly unique in that you are coming up with, for instance, kind of some of the film pitch work I do, I'm just getting like a paragraph treatment of a scene, or even less than that. And my job is to create an image that is kind of flashy. So I don't want to sound like a giant hypocrite here, having, just spent the last 10 minutes explaining why the flashy stuff isn't important. But yeah, so I think kind of in my world, it's skewed a little bit more towards flashy stuff. But when you're working in a studio, in pipeline kind of production, it is probably close to maybe 90% of rough stuff, and then 10% is kind of flashy. So it's interesting in a way that I mean, I understand it because the flashy stuff is nice. It's cool to look at, and it's got that wow factor. And so that's the stuff you end up seeing on the net most of the time. But yeah, the reality really is kind of the other way. Yeah, really kind of geared towards the rough stuff.
And I think too the flashy stuff, like where you're at with the pitch work, that's the very early work. I feel like when people are unfamiliar with how these projects get made, it's really jumbled. It's not clear these different stages.
Yep.
But you're not starting with the flashy work. It's something like that you get your start in the industry, and if that's the direction that you want to go, after a while you show your consistency, and then if you want to, you can pursue that flashy work. And I think it's important to mention that just because so many people they want to do the flashy work, but they don't realize that there's a whole kind of like progression that you go through your career before you're that go-to guy or girl that they know that, okay, we want this kind of look. This artist is amazing at this, and they're very consistent. Let's go with them. You need a body of work behind you before you're actually going to get to that point. Unless, there are the freak examples, people that come out, I'm sure there's been 16-year-olds that have worked on feature films and their work was just that good, but it's not the norm.
Yeah, it's an easy job to look at and go, oh, that seems so cool. Like, I just want to, let's just paint pretty stuff all the time. But like you said, apart from, there are like these kind of fringe cases of guys or girls who are just insanely talented and also insanely determined. And I think that's kind of something that a lot of people tend to overlook, is that it's not just talent. It's a hell of a lot of hard work. And another, like, of all the, another one-liner that my students hear a lot of the time is, you don't have to be talented. If you're talented, that's great, because there's nothing you can do about that. It's just one of those things, like, some people have some innate talent for something, some people may not. But, if I'm hiring someone in some imaginary world where people allow me to hire them, it's a matter of, are you able to sit down and do the work? And you can learn the skills. Anyone can learn the skills. That's like relatively easy. Is you can teach someone how to draw, but if you can't teach someone how to be kind of determined and motivated. And so if you have that self-drive and you have a little bit of talent sprinkled on top, then you're going to do totally fine. You'll make it easy. And if you happen to be one of those, geniuses that is insanely talented and insanely self-motivated, then, it's not even a discussion you have to have. You're probably already working. But, people just, you need to understand that most people are not geniuses, right? I'm not a genius. But it's just a matter of, putting your head down and getting the work done. And I think, like, showing people that is the reality of the industry, and also showing people that it can be achieved by, anyone who's willing to put the work in, I think is the important thing. Because it's really easy when you're first starting out, like you said before, you look on the internet and see all this cool stuff and go, oh God, I could never do that. But yeah, the two things you, I guess, really need to know is, one, you don't have to do that all the time, because it doesn't always have to be flashy. And two, you can do it. You just have to put the work in, and not like get discouraged. But since it is a slow process, it's one of those things where it's hard to often convince people that, hey, no, look, let's just keep doing this for a couple of years and you'll get there.
All right, last question. Let's say what kind of expectation would you give to somebody? We've already talked about how the pretty pictures that you see online isn't necessarily what you should be shooting for in the beginning as a student. What is something that people should be shooting for that's more based in reality, where they could start to say, hey, I could do that? Because I feel like someone goes to nedrogers.com and they're just going to say, nope, no way. But they still love video games, and they've always been doodling and drawing, but they need a little bit of direction. So what's a more realistic first step that somebody could say, like, well, I look at this work and I accept it, it's very cool, but for me, I just want to break in, or I want to get my first job. What should they be shooting for?
Yeah, okay, that's a really good question. I think probably the easiest thing to do these days with the internet as it is, and you know how easy it is to kind of consume all of this art and design, is I guess the first thing you have to do is be honest with yourself and figure out, do you enjoy consuming design and art and films and games, or do you genuinely want to create stuff? And once you've figured that out, I think the next step is figuring out something that you're genuinely interested in within that realm of entertainment. So do you like science fiction? Do you like fantasy? Do you like realism? Do you like crazy surreal stuff? You know, do you like dogs or cats? Or, you know, figure out something you actually genuinely have a passion for, and then just try and make something. Doesn't have to be a full, you know, animation or a game or, you know, a film, but go out and make a thing. Because if you start making stuff before you kind of start your educational journey, or like trying to get a job, it's going to set you up to succeed a lot quicker, because you're going to understand the potential like failure points of making stuff. And you know, the first failure point that I guess 99% of people come to, and is that's what like kicks them out of trying, is they try and make something they don't actually care about because they think they should be making something else. They look at what's on the internet and go, oh, I need to make the next Call of Duty. And so they try and emulate that style, and it just comes across as insincere. Whereas I think what you need to do is figure out what you actually enjoy looking at, what you enjoy consuming, what you enjoy creating, and then figure out how that all works into your own personal kind of taste, and create something along those lines. And so I guess the reason I recommend that is because if you set out with a couple of friends or a couple of people who you've met over the internet or through ArtStation or whatever, hopefully that means that you're going to have some shared interests, which is presumably why you're friends or why you've like started chatting on the internet or whatever like that. And then you can take that shared interest and you can make something. And even if you fail horrendously, you will have created the early steps of a project. So maybe you went, okay, let's make a short film, let's make an animation. And then so you did these little sketches for the design of your main characters. And then you got to the next stage and realized, oh, we don't know how to animate. Whoops, we forgot that skill. But then you go, oh, I don't want to be an animator, so that's okay. But then you've got these little sketches of these characters, and you made them with the intent of, you know, kind of producing something. And so you were thinking about what you were trying to produce, and that would have kind of shifted your thinking on the character designs and how you were going to do it. And then you go, okay, well, that didn't work. Let's do something else. Let's go make another animation, or let's make, you know, let's try and make a little game. Like, you know, Greg knows how to use Unity, so let's just go and try and make a little game, and then we'll use these characters maybe. And then, you know, it gives you a direction, it gives you a sense of purpose. And if you're working with people who are kind of like-minded, it's a lot easier to not give up. It's easier to just keep going because everyone's like, oh man, let's do this. So I think that would be my tip for things to do if you want to break into it, is just go and make stuff that interests you, because that's what will get other people excited in your work, is looking at it and going, oh, this person is really into cars or spaceships or alien creatures or whatever it is. And when people can sense that, I think innately, it's something that comes across in your work if you genuinely care about the subject matter.
I've got shivers just in the last 5 minutes of what you talked about, because I love having frameworks for people, and I think what you just laid out is so important that I would encourage people to go back and listen. But I'll just say it here again, and you might not even realize how genius what you just said is, Ned. But this thing with you know, we love video games and we love movies, and we love comic books and toys, all this stuff. But do you love to consume it, or do you love to create? And I feel like that's a huge distinction, because I see people who they don't really like to create, but they feel they're sort of like forcing themselves to try and do this, but they hate it. And it's okay to just be a consumer. There's ways that you can even be a consumer and still contribute. Like you could have your own podcast just talking about comic books. There's so many and they're so popular. But this is an important distinction. And so I just wanted, for those of you who love to create, I just want to tell a very quick story. So when I was a kid, I loved Ninja Turtles. We didn't have computers back then, if you can imagine a world without computers or with no internet or anything. But we had Ninja Turtles already. It was the 80s, and we had Nintendo. And I love Shredder. I love the design of Shredder. He's got this metal helmet and he's a ninja. And so I made a Shredder tinfoil hat, like mask and everything, and wore it around my neighborhood. But that's an example of like going and creating. Was it awesome? No, but it was just this little kid, but it's an example of creating. And I wonder, for you listener, if you might have been accidentally creating things and you're a creative person and you didn't realize it. So let's fast forward a little bit and the video games get better. I always knew that I wanted to make video games, and my brother, he's a consumer. He's really good at playing video games, high scores, fastest. He would always beat me at everything. But I was interested in creating. So while I was playing the game, I would just walk up and walk along the walls and look at the textures, or I would see, a cobweb blowing in the wind in an air vent. I'd be like, wow, how did they make that cobweb? And then I would get my 3D software and see if I could make a cobweb blow in the wind. I wasn't putting it in a video game, but this is an example of how you can look at the things that you're consuming and then take it back into the creative space and just start down that path that Ned's talking about. And I'm so appreciative that you laid that out for me and for everybody else. I'm going to use this. I'm going to steal it from you. I'm a stealer.
Please do.
But it's fantastic, and I hope for some people it helps you to see how you can take what you already have and then move forward with that you don't need to wait for anything.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, just like these days, like you were saying in the 80s, I was born on the very tail end of the 80s, but I understand an existence without computers, briefly anyway. And it's one of those things that nowadays you have access to the internet and you have all this great software, and every aspect of creation is getting more and more accessible. And so there really isn't an excuse to not be creating stuff if that's what you want to do. And I guess kind of like further to your point with the mask running around, it's one of those things that if you do that and you think you want to be, say, I want to be an animator, I really want to be an animator, and then you go off with your mates and you make a little animation and you realize that actually maybe you're not, you don't really have that drive. You thought you wanted to be an animator because you watch animation and you're like, oh, this is really good. But then, it ends up with, maybe got a friend who happens to be one of these geniuses who just picks up animation and runs with it. And I'm kind of like dredging up some old stuff for myself here, because this kind of happened with me, with some friends making a project where I was working on doing some animation, and I thought I wanted to do it because, it just kind of got thrown at me and I did it. But then it turned out I had a friend who was really good at animation. He did that. I ended up doing kind of texture work. And I think and it was this terrible, horrendous animation that we made. But I ended up doing painting, and I started learning, all these weird Photoshop tricks about how to create scratches in metal and all this like weird stuff. And I was like, actually, no, this is really cool. Maybe I'll do this. And so I think that's the really important thing about trying and failing is that you will figure out, you learn stuff about yourself, even if you don't want to sound too philosophical, but you learn things about yourself that you may have subconsciously known but didn't want to accept. But if I think the best thing you can do is just kind of listen to that stuff and go and kind of follow that path that gets created for you by kind of constant failure, which is not as scary as it sounds once you do it a few times. But yeah, if you just kind of pursue creating, you will find your little like niche. And then once you found that little niche, all you have to do is find someone who will pay you money to do it, and then you're a professional. And that's it. It's that simple.
Yep. Oh man, I wish I could download your brain, and because it really is that simple, or my brain or anybody. It's like once you're in and once you see the other side of the curtain, then you know that, wow, there's all these jobs, there's all these creative jobs inside these companies that people need to do. But on the other side of the curtain, it's so hard because you don't see the guy who loves trees and all he does is make trees all day. You could never imagine that was a job, that somebody is a tree designer for video games.
Yeah.
But I guarantee you that job exists. There's rock design. There's like all kinds of crazy things. And I guess you just have to like try it out for yourself and find where you fit in. And man, I wish whoever's listening to this all the best at going down
Absolutely.
this path.
Yeah, just fail upwards. That's the trick.
All right, Ned, any last words before we wrap up here?
Oh man, that was it. Fail upwards. That was That was my little tagline. I don't have a second one. I don't know. I just just like get out and create stuff. I know that sounds like super soppy, but it's what like people who work in this industry are lucky enough to be able to do that every day. So if you want to work in this industry, just do it now. Do it now for free. And if you do it hard enough, someone will come and pay you for it. I guarantee it.
All right, I love it. So Ned is on ArtStation. You can look him up, Ned Rogers. And then there's also nedrogers.com, nedrogers.com. And as usual, we'll have links to everything in case you're lazy and you don't like to type, or I don't know what other excuses. We'll have it all at pencilkings.com/podcast. And I'm just going to plug Pencil Kings because I don't do it enough. If you'd like to learn and come to a safe, private community where there's other artists, beginner and intermediate artists who are all working on their own projects and learning together, check us out at pencilkings.com. Tell your mom, tell your friends. We welcome everybody in. And that's all I got. We'll see you next week on the Pencil Kings podcast. Thank you very much, Ned.
No worries, man. Thanks for having me. Cheers.
Scope demands patience, skill, years of practice.
Ah, you talk like a fool. I would trade a century of practice for an ounce of inspiration.